In your broader bio, you state, as an advisor on education legislation and policy, you believe that words have meaning and legislation always has unintended consequences. Since implementation is where the rubber meets the road, it's critical that policy be developed using a planned and intentional approach. So, would you care to speak briefly about that statement? Are you referring to the often unintended consequences of education policy?
Well, I'm talking about education in general when I say that. But with regards to education, one example I'll give you is legislation for scholarship programs throughout the states.
Okay.
If you'll notice, if you'll do some research, you'll notice that scholarships are targeted. They target a particular segment of a population. Um, they will be either focused on low socioeconomic, inner city, urban kids, or they will be focused on children with disabilities. Now, what about that family who makes $1,000 or $2,000 above the allocation for a scholarship? Because it's based on your income. Scholarships typically are. And so what about that family that makes, their annual income is $1,000 to $2,000 more than's allocated, but they don't have the resources to necessarily go to private school full tuition? They're left hanging. Does their child not deserve a quality education as well? That is a constitutional objective right that's stated in state constitutions. So there's an unintended consequence that even though they're intending to help one segment of the population, they're hindering another segment of the population. You can go on further to talk about, this minimum wage at the federal level. They want to talk about raising the minimum wage. Well, there's a lot of unintended consequences when you raise the minimum wage, because they're only looking at an hourly rate. They're not looking at the economic impact. They're not looking at the unemployment impact. They're not looking at the community the community's ability to provide goods and services to their population. So there's always, in my mind, unintended consequences. They may be realized in the near term, but it may take a little bit longer for them to be realized as well. So, but also let me also state that a lot of times, well, I shouldn't say especially in education, but a lot of times legislation is reactionary. It is not planned.
Yeah.
And because they're reacting to something that happened in society or in an area or whatever the case might be, legislation needs to be planned and it needs to be intentional.
Yeah.
And they need to have a conversation when they're proposing legislation on, okay, what might be some unintended consequences? I don't think that thought process really happens in developing proposed legislation, at least not from what I've seen in my experience.